the fact that the tokens exist itself is gamified and fun for people, right? Because people inherently sometimes try to tie the performance of tokens to how people are feeling about the team, or how teams are doing, or how they're doing compared to other teams or other sports. And that's definitely not one for one by any means. I mean, at the end of the day, tokens are tokens, so they do get, our market is small, crypto is small in general compared to, something like traditional finance. So
This episode is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that makes it easy to buy, sell, and stake crypto assets. Uphold has over 300 plus cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and all the top altcoins, and they offer a crypto staking on over 19 crypto assets. I've been a user of the platform for many years. They are safe and reliable. They don't commingle or lend out your crypto funds, and they are 100% reserved. You can review their transparency report. Uphold also offers an amazing rewards program where you can earn up to 5.25% on stablecoins. This rewards program also allows you to get 24-hour early access to new tokens that they list. And to participate, you just simply have to open the app once per month, deposit $50 once per month, and trade $50 once per month. And the stablecoins that they support includes Ripple's RLUSD. You can earn up to 5% on that stablecoin and 5.25% on USBC. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold and all the great services they offer, visit the link in the description. Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and joining me today is Max Rabinovitch, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Chiliz. Max, it's great to have you on.
thanks, Tony. Yeah, happy to be in this.
Max, we were talking before the recording. I've heard about Chiliz and followed you over the years. And on the podcast, I've often talked about the token economy and tokens being created for sports teams and social tokens and much more. So I'm really excited to dive into what you and the folks at Chiliz are doing. But let's kick it off with your background. Tell us a bit about yourself and your professional background.
Yeah, happy to. I guess background on me as a person. Russian born. I was born in Moscow, but I was actually raised in the US ever since I was a kid in the great city of Chicago. And in terms of professional background, I think it's been somewhat eclectic. I have a background in creative direction and product development, mostly actually around mobile applications and corporate facing mobile applications a long time ago. And creative direction on anything from TV and TVC campaigns to a reality TV show in India many, many years back, as well as a background in the poker industry as well, both as a player when I was super young and then also just trying to innovate. It's actually how I met Alex, the founder of Chili's, trying to innovate how people perceive poker as a mind sport.
What was your first encounter with Bitcoin or blockchain? Was it at Chiliz or was it before that? And what was your aha moment?
Uh, it's a funny question. My first encounter was actually, I think, earlier than most people. One of my good friends in college, he'll remain nameless, first started talking to me about Bitcoin in late 2010. Uh, at which point I thought it was cool. He showed me the white paper and everything, and then was saying, "Oh, you should start buying a bunch of this stuff." And it was like in 2010, I think it was a very rational reaction for most people, including me, to be like, "No, like I'm not. That's cool, but I'm not dumb. I'm not gonna buy any of this stuff." He stayed directly into crypto. He was one of the first employees at Coinbase and went on to do a lot of other really cool stuff. So I've been at least tangentially aware and, let's say, party to the culture and the technology for a long time since then. But it probably wasn't until 2016, if you're asking about like an aha moment in terms of, I mean, for me, it wasn't aha in terms of, oh, I can get really rich doing this. It was more kind of seeing just the potential that it could have in terms of developing a new industry, disrupting an existing industry, and all of that. And then I started much more closely, I think, following developments surrounding Bitcoin and Ethereum back then. Um, was kind of always around during the first evolutions of the idea of, a DAOs as well. And that kind of flowed directly, to be honest, into our eventual creation of Chiliz and Socios, because that was not more than 1 year later in late 2017, where Alex and I were still working in poker, more or less, not, but kind of starting to get intrigued and interested in what other things we can look into building. Sorry,
Oh, no worries. Take your
rest
time.
there.
We can edit out.
Um, and he was, I mean, if you remember, kind of say the late summer of 2017, all the way up to December, that was, Bitcoin's first real mainstream, at least mainstream covered, hyperbolic, cycle. So it became kind of harder and harder in a sense to ignore it when you're thinking about new business ideas. And neither myself or Alex are, like crypto native OGs in that sense. We'd spent years we were the first people to put poker on Twitch. We created like player-based, systems and poker inspired, turn-based strategy games and things of that ilk, and a lot of, television content. We thought, well, we think of ourselves as people that work in sports, just in this kind of weird sport that we've loved for years and years. I wonder if there's some intersection between blockchain technology and sports. Like what can you do with that? And honestly, it being the winter by that point of 2017, it's not like the industry today where it's almost oversaturated with ideas. Everyone's tried everything. Everyone's tried every, whether reasonable or kind of ham-fisted application of blockchain into something. Back then, it was still just blue oceans. No one tried really anything. Even I mean, the only people we knew doing NFTs back then were the CryptoKitties team, right? That obviously went on to do cool things. So we kind of went our separate ways for winter vacation thinking, and we came back and I pitched this simplistic idea of like, well, what if there was a centralized DAO, right? What if you
Mhm.
created a token supply for an esports team? We weren't even thinking about football back then. And then, everyone who liked the team bought one or more tokens, and then each token equaled one vote. And you could, the team would ask the player base, or the fan base rather, sorry, to make decisions. Um, and he agreed, and we kind of both agreed, like that kind of makes sense. And I think that was, not to ramble too much, kind of the formative end of the aha moment where, like, wait, we have, like, there's a good idea this tech can be applied for something, and also we can be the ones to do it, because it seems like no one had this idea before, and do it in an environment where, like, it looks like, whether you call it crypto adoption or just general cognizance and interest in crypto, was really, hitting this very big peak.
Hmm. It's funny you mentioned your background in poker. When I was working at a digital marketing agency around 2013, 2014, I had a coworker who was a really great poker player, and he played online poker, and they would settle in Bitcoin. And he told me about it, but I was skeptical. I didn't pay attention, and I wish I did. I think everybody has these stories like, man, I should have, paid attention, bought sooner. But eventually,
Oh yeah.
2016, started investing in crypto, but I could have got in around 2013.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had that. I mean, listen, I look back on like late 2010 a few times, not like it's not something that wears on me, but
Right.
would I have loved to listen to my friend and just bought, 5, 8, 10 cent Bitcoin for the heck of it? I think realistically, when people have those kind of thoughts, they don't like, I would have spent it at some point before. It's not like no one's insane or degenerate enough to just, oh, I'll just hold it hoping it goes to, 107,000, whatever it is today, dollars, a token. But it's funny you mentioned, crypto poker, because I do remember that as well. It was actually a website called, sealswithclubs.com,
Mm.
made by, I forget the guy's name. he was a big like poker boom era personality, but he's kind of transitioned into being a full-time crypto guy. He's a like a 2011 Bitcoiner, but he had started this website, and I did talk to other players back then, like, should we try it? Should we play it? Because it did have allure, right? It had this idea of like instant settlement and everything. And if you know anything about the history of online poker, in 2011, especially in the US, like it all basically imploded and took years to come back.
Yeah.
Um, and back then, I think the biggest game that ran seals with clubs was a 0.51 BTC game, which I think back then was the equivalent of like we'd see at a casino, like a 50 cent dollar game or a $2 blind no limit game. So like a small live game, like, where you can buy in for $200 or 200 Bitcoins back then. And I think they did actually have a funny moment where the site ran for a number of years. And I think the first time Bitcoin peaked very rapidly up to over $1,000, like people were playing and they weren't like looking at the price back then.
Mm.
It's not like there's price feeds everywhere. You have to go on some weird website like Preve or forum, and people would just tell you what the price is if you weren't like a complete insider. And at a certain point, those games were the biggest poker games running on the internet, period. Because people just didn't notice, so they were accidentally playing, what basically is like a $500,000 buy-in poker game, thinking that they were playing something, 10, 20 times smaller.
Wow. That's incredible. And hindsight is 2020. It's easy to look back and say, I should have done this. But at that point, as you mentioned, no one thought Bitcoin would get to this point. It was so early. The infrastructure wasn't there. You had the hacks, Mount Gox, and all these things that were happening. So it was not the same market. Now you have the social proof, you have TradFi, everybody's bought in. But back
Sure.
then, it was just cypherpunks.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, for those who don't know about Chili's, tell us about what you guys do and what's your mission.
Sure. I'll try to be high level about it. So Chiliz has been around, as for my story, its genesis was in early 2018. And we had set out initially to do, I think, two things. We had this long-term vision of eventually we wanted to create a blockchain, but focused on sports and entertainment. And I think we were cognizant enough back then to realize like you don't just get to, it was very disingenuous to just say that that's what you're building and that's magically what it becomes because, blockchain technology at its core is an extremely generic technology, right? It's a trustless ledger and transactional system. So you don't just get to make a blockchain, or fork it. In our case, we initially did a private, fork of Ethereum and then just say, oh, this one's special because it focuses on sports. What does that mean? So we had, going back to the initial idea that we'd had in late 2017, 2018 of saying, okay, we have a proof of concept idea, which we think is really interesting and which initially was actually called the Chiliz platform, but, became the socios.com and fan tokens and all that, where we kind of took it upon ourselves to say, okay, let's build our own proof of concept on top of this chain, prove that you can actually create something scalable, retail facing that is in the sports and esports industry. And then when the users and the liquidity comes and then the business network and we were hoping obviously we'd keep building and the infrastructural network comes, at that point we would have a real sports blockchain, at least in the sense that like we could offer other projects product market fit through our community. We already had a business network of IPs. And that's how it came about. That was kind of just the vision. And I think to a great extent, we were lucky that we were able to, execute past every milestone without dying. I think timing had a lot to do with it
Hmm.
as well. And we were able to at first build Socios as a centralized platform that offered tokenized fan engagement, right, where you can go buy PSG and Juventus and Barcelona tokens and then vote on team decisions. You would get put on a reward spectrum where the more you engaged and the more you held, the more you would be able to collect team rewards, tickets, merchandise, digital goods, things of that ilk. Um, and at a certain point about 2 years ago, we really kind of gained a lot of conviction saying, okay, I think we're ready to actually launch Chiliz as a permissionless, layer one chain, not just until then it was just a private side chain where obviously we were the only ones that were developing on it. Fan tokens only lived on it. So they were essentially stuck to either Socios or the exchanges that they were listed on. And we kind of dove in head first and did another fork of the Chiliz chain that's, as it is today.
And is this still Ethereum based? And are you planning to add support for other blockchains?
It's Ethereum based, yeah. It's a fork of Binance Smart Chain. It's a highly augmented. We actually built the current version of the chain in partnership with a development team called Anchor, which is I think some of the best blockchain developers in the world, at least in my opinion.
And so let's go through like a mock scenario. So let's say I'm an NBA team because I love basketball, right? Let's say it's the Lakers, the LA Lakers, and they want to launch some social tokens. Why would they want to do this? Is it to build better customer or fan engagement, to have the fans share in more of the benefits of the team's success and things like that?
Yeah, I think the answer changes based on the organization or even the league that you're talking about. I mean, fundamentally, and I think it would be very cynical of us not to at least touch on it. It doesn't need to be a focus by any means, but it's a means of revenue for teams. And whether people are happy to say it or not, all sports teams are for-profit businesses, right? Which means that no matter what you see on Twitter or how they talk about themselves and their legacy and their fandom and their brand, really the core mechanics of that team are we need to make money to pay for players, to keep growing, to pay for even better players, to win trophies, to get more audience, to sell more jerseys and sell a higher price or more tickets, and so on and so forth. And I think with our fan token product, even starting in 2019 and 20, when we were first kind of ready technically and started approaching, at first, ironically, esports teams, because we thought, if we're ever lucky enough, we'll maybe work with a big sports IP, and figured out very quickly that it's actually weirdly easier to work with large teams than startup esports teams and brands.
Mm.
But when we went to them in our minds, we had this idea that none of these teams are actually in any effective way currently engaging or creating revenue from or recognizing their global fan bases, right? At that point, teams would happily quote, statistics like we have, 400 million, 500 million global fans. And it didn't really take too much digging until, we realized, well, they do have all those fans, but all those fans are basically ignored, right? There's not really any platform or merchandise or system by which you can offer any like IP driven thing to, a PSG fan living in Indonesia or, a Barcelona fan, even to an extent, living in the US or maybe in South America or other markets. And we thought we had an eloquent solution because we had essentially developed a revenue positive engagement and recognition system, which teams wanted, that very easily scaled globally, meaning that all you have to do is buy this one, fungible token and you had something that was, official, contracted. I use Barcelona as the example team, Barcelona token, and that entitled you to something, right? You can go onto our platform and Barcelona would sometimes ask you questions, right? And the more you engaged with Barcelona as a team, and back then we had even a bigger focus on fan engagement. And we had features like game day check-ins and predictor challenges and trivia and all that. The more that would be essentially recognized and shown to the team and you'd get rewarded with we did a lot of Zoom meet and greets. Our top end, not really scalable experiences, but like fly with the team experiences and play on the pitch experiences.
Mm.
And teams, I think, really, really responded to that because we, being at least conventional sports outsiders, assumed that we would make this pitch and be given 20 reasons by all these teams, all the veteran executives in the front office of like, well, that's cute, but 20 other companies have tried, figuring out ways to, extract $1 from fans and in return give them some value that wasn't based around broadcasts. And it didn't happen. We went to a bunch of these offices and we did this pitch of like, what if every fan, you say you have half a million, half a billion fans? What if 10% of them, 50%, 1% of them gave you a dollar and all you had to do was, consistently engage with them or at least, support this IP licensed, token. And they kind of shrugged and were like, oh, that's, we never thought of it that way. That's actually a pretty good idea. So I think that the core of it, just to be more brief, is that I think what the team saw in it besides revenue was an actual way to expand, right? Because the ambition of every sports team is to eventually be a global sports team. And it's funny that you bring up, we can speak about, the US specifically, I guess, in a bit, but for teams in North America, it's the biggest sports market in the world, right? 20 cents out of every dollar made in sports globally is made by the NFL. But the NFL and even to some extent the NBA they're domestic focused, right? Their revenue and their fandom comes from North America. And they're all very well aware that there's a much bigger world out there where they can be expanding into. And I think, the NBA is probably the most mature in that, obviously. Uh, not in small part due to the the Chicago Bulls, in my opinion, in the 1990s, which single-handedly, Jordan turned the NBA into a global sport, which I got to witness. I moved to the States. I moved to the US
Right.
in 1994. So my indoctrination into like American culture was I got to witness, the greatest basketball team that ever played in their prime. Um, but they, all those teams, they see that same potential. I think when you look at all the major leagues in the US, all of them are becoming more and more hungry, I think, to not just innovate in the digital space, but also to figure out ways of like, how can we actually reach these markets where we believe like we can get a foothold, we get fandom, where we could, make a real go of competing against, football, soccer as a sport that people care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so fascinating because, to your point, it allows these sports teams and these leagues to go global and they can verify because of the blockchain and you can know how many fans and you can engage with them differently and those fans maybe holding those tokens they get the exclusive experiences so they feel a greater affinity to the brand and the team, right? It's just amazing because this technology is even outside of sports because of tokenization of different assets. It's creating truly global markets that can run 24/7. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And it's funny that you bring up, the kind of the caring bit because I think we realize, or at least in my opinion, we we almost had this kind of like, ass end backward system in a way where we realized in a normal funnel for anything, not even just in sports, right? The last thing that happens is a user gets monetized, right? You love something, you love it more and more, and then suddenly, then at that point you'll start spending money on subscriptions or, concert tickets or whatever. And well, I think we realized the core thing that we were doing actually is, putting that on its head because when people buy, the first thing that happens, especially in international markets, is the person spends money on the IP of the team. And they may know the IP or they may be like a super casual fan, but that action in and of itself, I think, ends up investing some people into the team because if you buy $100 worth of PSG, for example, you much more incentivized to actually care about, well, what's PSG up to because I have $100 of these PSG tokens.
Right.
And I think that I think we're ironically still in a very early stage of it, but kind of the most scalable r result of that, I think, is going to be kind of these sentiment, like these fan tokens or even other kind of say IP tied tokens, creating a sentiment marketplace where it's the fact that the tokens exist itself is gamified and fun for people, right? Because people inherently sometimes try to tie the performance of tokens to how people are feeling about the team or how teams are doing or how they're doing compared to other teams or other sports. And, that's definitely not one for one by any means. I mean, at the end of the day, tokens are tokens. So they do get, our market is small. Crypto is small in general compared to, something like traditional finance. So tokens are tied to the market as much as they're tied to the other stuff that's happening to them. Uh, but I think people really started responding to that. And I think that's, if there's going to be one global common denominator for why people are engaging with fan tokens, I think it's going to be that, like that feeling, almost community-based feeling of, oh, we're participating in this kind of game, this sentiment-based game, right? My tokens are doing better than yours. It means my team's better than yours, and so on. Over and above the obviously the integral, the rewards and tickets and everything else, we try to scale as much as we can.
Yeah, it's like human nature playing out, right? It's to the point of why we like sports, why we root for certain teams and certain players is just in our nature. And then you now gamify it, like you said, with the tokens. So I had a question about the token setup. Does the token need to have a monetary value in the open market, or can the sports team say, you know what, we don't want to have a monetary value necessarily. Here's what we're gonna sell it for, but it doesn't need to trade in the open market. Are both scenarios? Are you is it can
Sure.
that happen?
I think it can happen. I wouldn't advocate necessarily for it happening. I mean, especially through the years of our business, we've been approached. Actually, the first time we tried to enter the US market in 2021 and 22, which we did get hamstrung by. It was no fault of our own. Our entry coincided with the eventual collapse of FTX and all the reputational fallout that had both in Washington and actually, ironically, on the U.S. Sports market because of how much money they poured into. They were the umpire badge of the MLB, and on the Heat stadium. But when we first entered the U.S., that was the first thing that actually all the leagues asked, because they asked from the perspective of regulatory safety, because they were worried about the SEC back then, which I mean was a different world, as you're well aware. Um, but we couldn't figure out, not to say what the point of it was, but it takes away both any advantage that we currently have in terms of kind of, let's say, globalized reach and composability. Um, Meaning that, right now you have their tokens and you can trade them everywhere. They don't even need to stay on Socios now. If Socios is non-custodial, they could eventually get bridged to other chains. They can get used by other people, and whatever they're used for, right, is tied to the team IP. You could do whatever you want with it. I think in large part, not to go on a huge tangent, but what saved us in the last winter cycle to an extent is, like, we weren't tied. Like an NFT collection, for example, is tied, right? You mint 1,000 NFTs. They can only do that one thing,
Right.
right? But at the end of the day, fan tokens are generic. They're currently being used for what we think is the best use case, right? It's, in our case, it was first a higher focus on fan engagement, and now more a bit staking and transactional and decentralized. That doesn't mean it can change, right? It could change based on user demand, and you really don't have that kind of flexibility if you try to create like a fully centralized, non-transferable system, almost to the point where you can still create like that kind of points-based, token-based experience. You don't even really need blockchain. And the reality is people have, and it tends to, it's other industries, I don't know, but in sports, I could tell you it doesn't work out because if you have a loyalty layer, like it has to be predicated on somehow, at least at a minimum, paying for itself and its operational costs. And there's no good example of that having been done. If you're just going to say, okay, buy these tokens, they'll always stay $1 and $1 equals one vote, but you can't move them anywhere and you can't do anything else with them. And you can't actually use them to express any sort of sentiment. The market can't engage with them.
Right.
Because I think that's, yeah, as we were talking earlier, I think it's one of the fundamental aspects of what make the tokens appealing, to
Right.
people. But it does make it safe. I just think at the end of the day, it's a different experience. And we always advocated like for the teams that want to do that, like there's dozens and dozens of operators who I would argue are, because they were pure players, way better than us at offering, a loyalty platform experience for their fans if that's what they wanted to, right? This was a bit different.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And look, if I'm a New York Knicks fan living, near New York. If I was holding a New York Knicks token, and let's say they win the championship and the value of that token goes up, I'm going to be a happy fan, right? And the other aspect I wanted to ask you about was, as a token holder in a mock scenario, do you eventually see that I can use this in DeFi, lend out the token for a certain term or borrow against it? And this could happen globally because it's all on the blockchain.
I would hope so. I mean, I think our focus, especially over the next 12 months, is going to be leaning much more into DeFi in terms of what they can be used for or what I think they should be used for. I would say it's less important than the ability to make that available as an option, right? Because at the end of the day, they are assets
Mhm.
like any other, on-chain asset. And I think actually fan tokens lend themselves to a lot of gamified twists on DeFi, over and above, not just, I mean, lending is lending and whatnot, but I mean, you can create gamified staking experiences and gamified prediction market experiences that are fully decentralized and protocol driven using fan tokens that you can't really, like, there's not really another example right now in the crypto world as a whole of this kind of condensed, IP connected or thematically connected asset class. Maybe a bit you can argue, uh, meme coins, right? But you can do, two-way, vaults and staking competitions between two teams that, play like Inter Milan and AC Milan, for example. They play in a derby. You can create a DeFi experience around that. That's just, it is at its core, some DeFi mechanism, but it's, let's say the fun version of it, the themed version of it, something that's maybe predicated on a game result or, opposing communities of those two tokens. So I think it's actually a really natural fit. And I think honestly, for a long time, we were so focused on the centralized aspect of our business and ensuring we were one of the few people in crypto that said like, listen, we're going to launch these tokens and they're going to have utility and we come hell or high water, we're going to provide that utility that, we were never really kind of waiting in the DeFi space. We weren't DeFi guys. And I think it's over the past year and a half, especially, it's become much more clear to us that like, oh, that's, the future for us, not just, as asset issuers and managers for fan tokens, but I think in terms of where the crypto world is going to go is going to be, further into DeFi and in a broader sense, where I think the definition of DeFi itself is gonna shift from just becoming, a type of exchange.
When these tokens are issued, how are they custodied? Is it the team custodying? Are you assisting with that? And then the end user, what wallet services or wallets can they use to
Sure.
self-custody those tokens?
It really depends. I mean, when we launch a new token in partnership, we custody the treasury. I mean, a lot of that is, I wouldn't say by design, it's out of necessity. I mean, at first we went to teams, said like, hey, you guys can hold these as your token, you can have, but we quickly learned that sports teams aren't in the asset custody business and they're not set up for it. They don't feel comfortable doing it, which I don't blame them for, right? Because if you're new to it, it can be very anxiety inducing.
Yep.
in its finality and the stakes. Um, so we custody the treasury. And I would say we operate as an asset issuer and manager in that sense. But in terms of when the tokens go into circulation, it's just like any other asset, especially now. So if you want to hold them in a non-custodial wallet, you can hold them on MetaMask. You can hold them. Socios operates as a non-custodial wallet now. We've made that migration recently as well. Or basically any other non-custodial wallet that's integrated with Chiliz chain, as well as obviously the exchanges, many exchanges around the world. I think the top 20% of our assets are fairly ubiquitously listed. So whether you're using, OKX or OKX non-custodial or Binance, et cetera, if you choose to hold your tokens there and have them be custodied by the exchange, it's really up to the user, the fan in that sense.
Got it. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It can act and live like the other crypto assets out there. So that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. Tell us about some of the teams that are using your services and the tokens they've launched, and maybe some use cases that you see that are really good.
You mean the use cases that the teams are launching themselves, or the ones that we kind of manage and operate?
That the teams are doing. Like, oh, maybe you can tell us some of the teams that are building with your tech, and any cool things that you're seeing, that they're doing.
Sure. Well, I don't want to try to list all of them. It's over 70 different teams. The biggest ones are in terms of at least market presence and IP are probably, Barcelona, Juventus, um, Arsenal, PSG, AC Milan, Inter, Tottenham Hotspurs. We work with the UFC. The UFC has a token, as does the PFL. I'll stop there, I guess. I could probably keep going, but at a certain point, it's not
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
make
You
for
can
the
list like
best
the top five.
podcast
Yeah,
content.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, when we started working with teams, we were doing 100% of everything, right? When we first launched the first five tokens we launched, our pitch included an explanation of what blockchain was, right? And examples of like Bitcoin is an example of a blockchain. Here's how it works. Like, literally explaining what it was. So it seemed for a long time to be like just too far of a reach to be like, hey, this technology that you don't really care about, that you don't know how it works, that you're not set up for, like, how are you going to integrate it, like natively in the stuff that you do? Um, it's a different world today than it was back in 2020 when we started, but it was I think a slow progression where the more we worked with teams and ownership groups, and the more they themselves got into crypto, whether through the sponsorship door, or because other people were pitching them other products. Um, I think they became more open to doing it. So then you do see, I'll use Atletico Madrid, for example. They did native fan token utility integration into their app, the Atleti app, where you can buy tokens directly on there.
Mhm.
Ownership of the tokens lets you access uh, unique rewards and unique content and things of that nature. Well, we just had Team Heretics, which is an esports team, which recently launched their own shop and loyalty area that they built. That has direct wallet connection and utility for tokens. So basically, if you have a Team Heretics tokens, you get better deals and kind of first in line for drops and things like that. Ninjas of Pajamas, which we just launched with recently. It's actually the first divisible fan token we launched, which is something we hope to upgrade other tokens to, primarily so that they can just be more one-to-one suitable with DeFi environments. But
Sure.
they were actually the first team, for example, that launched with the assumed expectation of like, listen, guys, we don't want Chili's Socios to build, or run, loyalty or utility activations. They have their own platform called the Dojo, which is already completely, fundamentally, I would say, on-chain compatible. They've integrated Chili's chain, and they want the core utility of, the Dojo tokens to be things that they build. and they run as well. And then we have it's not necessarily an example of fan tokens, but we have PSG, for example, which decided they wanted to run a validator because they thought it would be good for their tokens as well. So PSG is actually a validator on the Chiliz chain, and they accrue obviously validation rewards, and they use those to buy PSG tokens so that they actually build up their own native treasury that they can use for third party activations because they do a lot in crypto. They actually work with multiple chains, and they have I think close to a dozen different partners, and they realized, I think, after a few years of partnership that like, oh, these fan tokens can actually be a pretty potent engagement tool for us natively. It doesn't need to be, Chili's, Socios folks kind of selling them and running a program. We can be giving this out as incentives to engage with everything else that we're building in crypto.
Mm. Now, tell us about your plans to move into the US market, pitch US leagues. We were talking about the NFL and the NBA earlier, in light of, the change in approach to crypto from the US government.
Sure, yeah, happy to. Well, I told you earlier, in 2022, we made a huge push into the US, and it was all very public. We ended up signing partnerships with, I think, 65 total teams in the US. I think 28 NBA teams and 13 NFL teams, 13 NHL teams, the entirety of the MLS, which included the league and every team. Because I mean, that was peak optimism for everyone, where even the leagues were saying, yeah, please come in. Let's start making these deals. Let's work with teams. And all these deals will eventually lead into token launches. As we're aware that didn't happen because FTX collapsed and crypto became a nadir in terms of industry reputations, especially in the US. The American SEC took, I guess I'll be politically tactful, a very aggressive tack towards regulatory enforcement, and the leagues went from being very close to a point of comfort to eventually letting us launch tokens to saying, we don't want to touch we don't want to touch anything crypto related because this is the biggest scandal that's currently happening in the US. And basically said, listen, we like you guys. You seem to be the adults in the room. We treated all the teams, even that we didn't launch a token with, I think very fairly. We spent almost 80 million in total in terms of doing deals, none of which panned out. That 80 million went to zero in a sense. But we kind of went away with our reputations intact that at least we're a trustworthy partner. And we had this sense that, okay, maybe in 5 or 10 years,
Mm.
whenever the US gets around to making, utility asset based businesses viable at scale in the US without the threat of, basically just getting deposed and horrible things happening to you, that would slowly come back. And obviously that, wasn't the case because there was an incredibly fast 90-degree shift, obviously with the new incoming administration that very quickly purged the SEC and I don't want to say put in, but basically fostered a new SEC that is very, very overtly crypto friendly, and I think understands all the wrongs that have been done to the industry through their offices over the past half decade, and actively started asking projects to come in. So even starting in late January, Alex and I went to Washington to meet with sports executives as well, but then also lobbyists and people inside the American, let's say, crypto lobbying community to basically ask like, okay, what should we do? We can tell that things are changing very rapidly and extremely, but what does that mean for us? How should we
Mm.
really be looking to go back into this market? And if so, how so? And eventually, Alex, you went back to Washington and yeah, you met with Bo Hines at the White House. He got a meeting at the SEC directly, which was our chance to kind of pitch the reality of our business that, hey, we're the retail crypto people. We create these utility assets. Here's how they work. We want nothing more than to work with, American businesses and start, making these assets broadly available to American fans and exporting, American sports internationally to help them grow. And I think something about that messaging resonated with the crypto task force at the SEC. I think they saw that we were serious. They saw that were serious about working in a long term, both with them and then also with, the American leagues. Um, and invited us to work on a no action letter request draft, which is for us, obviously, like many other businesses, the silver bullet when you're talking to the NBA or the NFL, which are, I think, rightly so, very conservative organizations at their core, in terms of just legal exposure. Um, and to see if we can get that no action relief, which will make it, I think, realistic to come back into the U.S. quickly and in full force.
That's great. And so I'm so happy to hear that and the progress that's being made there. It's completely different SEC. And boy, I'm excited about what you guys are doing and launching these tokens with these teams because, like I said, I'm a big basketball fan. I would be buying the New York Knicks token once that goes live and things like that, and
Sure.
looking to do, cool things eventually, maybe with DeFi and, kind of like if I had season tickets, I lend out the tokens or I sell well, I guess lend out the tickets if I can in that way, and earn some passive income off of it. And when I'm ready to use it, I use it. I unlock perks and benefits. It's
Yeah.
just this incredible new world that this technology is unlocking, and it's just exciting, man. So sounds like things, in getting the no action letter and so forth are progressing for you here in the United States.
They are indeed, yeah. And I think I don't want to be overly bullish, but I definitely feel like it's a matter of when and not if for us, which I think I mean, in fairness, we've been public about that as well. And I'm personally excited, not just because obviously I'm an American myself, and those are the teams that I care most about. Especially being a Chicago sports fan is oftentimes more pain than happiness, but it doesn't mean that I don't love them. But as just someone who's been a part of the sports industry in a sense, I'm really excited to work with these teams because all of back in 2021 and 22, the coolest, most innovative ideas we had teams pitching us, not the other way around.
Hmm.
They mostly came from American teams, from NFL teams and NBA teams, because they were the guys that, yeah, started like, hey, brainstorming, like, wait, what if you could exactly, what if you use tokens and some sort of lending systems for season tickets? What if you could create like a lightning staking system where I could stake, 1,000 tokens for 6 hours or 3 hours, but that would get when I go to a game that gets me in through the same door that the players are going into, or into like some VIP area, or even like paying for parking or something like that, or starting to really think deeply about like, well, how could we integrate the ownership of these tokens as something that could give you discounts for food and drink when you're at the stadium, or stuff that we had not heard from a lot of European teams, or at least an openness even to like really integrate and disrupt that that deeply. And that makes me really, really excited. And I think the openness of US teams to also innovate on what a fan token can be. I'll give you a concrete example. I've the past year worked on this idea of a new version of a fan token that has dynamic supply where
Hmm.
when a team wins, I'm oversimplifying it because there would be, I think, a much more complicated logic. But like basically, when a team wins, you burn supply, and when a team loses, you mint supply, right? So it creates some supply-based interaction that happens on every single game day that's purely automated, smart contract driven and permanent. Um, and it's ironically, that, it's the US teams and the US leagues that hear that and say, yeah, that's exciting. That's new. That's more fun. That, they get excited by the idea of leaning into it being this kind of gamified sentiment marketplace, and leading into like, how can we use these tokens to really break apart what we're doing, both at the stadium and and internationally. We had teams pitch us on the idea of like, is it, what's the most effective way to actually create like a geographic map to see where people are owning tokens? Because then we can ask the token communities, hey, want to do a pop-up event and we haven't decided on Rome, Tokyo, or Sao Paulo. So we're just going to track and see which of those communities buy the most tokens over the next 24 hours, and whoever buys the most, that's where we're going to do the pop-up event and bring our team and do all these activations.
Wow.
So I think just in many ways, in terms of what's possible in the future, that like the future of that is working with the US organizations they're ready to sink effort and money and attention into it. I think in a way that a lot of other organizations just aren't or don't have the means to.
I love that. I mean, there's so many creative possibilities and opportunities here. And I love those, incentives that where the fans can benefit. I love, the gamification here. And I say that as not just as a crypto fan, but just as a sports fan. I would love that. And to be able to, try to get the extra perks and benefits and the parking and whatever it is, right? Going through the doors of players, and those are just cool ideas, and I love that. I think sports fans are going to love that across the United States, and you'll probably see greater engagement from folks. And yeah, I just love that. That's just amazing. You talked a lot about the things you guys are doing. Anything else on your roadmap that you want to highlight?
Yes, I mean, we have a hackathon happening. I think, to my knowledge, we're the first people that have ever done a hackathon inside of a professional sports stadium. We're doing it at the Parc des Princes Stadium where PSG plays the UCL champions. If there's anyone watching this who's European and cares about the Champions League, and that's happening July 11th to 13th, and that's obviously part of a broader push we have on just figuring out ways and means of sustainably incentivizing developers who want to develop in our weird little world, I guess, for lack of a better word, of people that want to make utility-minded retail experiences, platforms, assets, whether it's for sports or hopefully in the future entertainment as well. Because, and kind of going full circle back to what I said, that's our vision for the chain, and I think we can help those people. I think we're a small chain, and we don't have any illusions about one day competing with the Solanas or Polygons, maybe even Sui's of the world, because we're not a generalistic chain. But I think if you want to build on a protocol where the core development team and everyone else around it will help you get your first 1,000 users, if you make, an on-chain fantasy game, or you want to connect with, the sports industry in some commercial way without getting, fleeced or figuring out which is the right door to enter through, I think we can help you more than anyone else in the industry. And
I
that's
love
what, that's what else we're focusing on.
I love it, man. I'm a fan of what you guys are doing. I think it's a future. I see it both from as a sports fan as well as from a crypto fan. Question about people creating fake tokens, right? We see now it's so easy for anyone to launch a token, a meme coin. You go to pump.fun and things like that. Do you see a world where you got scammers who are going to try to create a New York Knicks token and say, hey, this is the real one? And I know, the people who are educated about the technology are probably not going to fall
Yeah.
for it, but there are going to be a lot of people who will because it's the first go around for them.
That's a good question, but I think it's a bit self-regulating in the way that, like, you're right that everyone can make say token or a token on a different protocol that has the same ticker and all this stuff. But ironically, those fake token, like the places you see that kind of stuff, bullshit for lack of a better word, flourish, is like the depths of the crypto trenches.
Hmm.
So it's one, it has a lack of scale. And two, if you're talking about, let's say us wanting to adopt more people, or, a Knicks fan accidentally buying the wrong token, I can guarantee you that the fake Knicks token, won't be listed in the future on Coinbase. It won't be available
Right.
And that, the Knicks won't be tweeting about that token on that chain. It's part of the reason that we have this chain. That the fan tokens are minted on the Chiliz chain are minted with us. They're all contractually bound. The teams are actually on board with everything. And that's why they get so ubiquitously distributed and I think more than anything supported on our core wallet. So I don't think you can ever get rid of you can't get rid of it in any industry, right? You're not going to stop people from making, you know, rip off Air Jordans or retro 12s.
Right.
But I don't think it necessarily poses an existential threat to any industry. I think in crypto as well.
Yeah, this is a great point. It won't have the listings, the network effects. It won't be on the regulated platforms, and even if it pops up on some scammy site, it won't last too long. And I'm sure eventually there's going to be a lot of look. There's already IP laws, but to your point, right? People still make rip-off stuff. You go in New York, where I'm close to, and you walk down certain streets, and they're selling fake Gucci bags, right? So it's like,
I mean, that's universal. That's in Madrid as well. And they're
yeah.
nice. They're nice Gucci bags.
Yeah, you can't stop that. But Max, I love what you guys are doing, and we'll have to do round two as things develop here in the United States, and some of my favorite teams start launching tokens. But I got some wrap up questions here for you. First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
I wouldn't create my own metaverse. I was always a very outspoken critic of the metaverse. Well, I'll say that with a caveat. I think whenever Neuralink or whatever a Neuralink equivalent is like actually exists and you could feel like you're in a dream, I think the metaverse is going to take off and everyone's going to love it. Uh, I think the metaverse, as people tried to sell it for the last 3 years, is a bunch of garbage. To be completely honest with you, I don't think anyone Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials like me, anyone older, nobody wants a 3D interface to the internet. Nobody wants 3D interface experiences. Nobody wants to go into a fake 3D store to buy fake 3D items. I'd rather just have nothing, just go use the normal internet. I mean, we have artificial intelligence that's primarily just a text box. So not to be too cynical about it, but just no metaverse. I would opt to not have one.
I certainly understand your sentiment because even as a crypto enthusiast and a technology enthusiast, I have not gotten the pull to go be in the metaverse because I don't see anything
No
appealing right
one's
now.
no
Yeah.
one's gotten the pull. It's the most insane. And I've never met anyone who thought it was cool. The only people I've met who like really push the metaverse are people that are trying to sell like the metaverse. Because I don't see how anyone could be interested in, oh, let's create a virtual version of New York City. Like, yeah, that's called Minecraft. That's called Minecraft. It's a game. Children love it. No one really needs like a digital twin of a city or X, Y, or Z because who's hanging out in there? Hang out in the real world.
All right, I got some rapid fire questions here for you. Favorite food,
Favorite food? I'll say raw tuna.
favorite musician or band,
Modest Mouse. That one's easy.
favorite movie.
Favorite movie? That's pretty hard. I guess I can't do like a top three. Um,
Sure, why not? Yeah,
I'll say Lost in Translation, The Thin Red Line. I'll go Blade Runner 2049 as well.
that's a good one. Favorite book.
Favorite book? Probably the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, just in terms of how much fun I had reading it. I don't think it's necessarily the best literary book, but far and away the most fun I've ever had reading words on a page.
Hmm. And when you're not working at Chili's, what are you doing for fun?
Hanging out with my son.
Nice. Max, a pleasure chatting with you. I love what Chili's is doing. I'm a big fan of the technology and where this is going to go. And like I said, we'll have to do round two as things progress in the United States. But thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me, Tim.